everybody. I am Marina and I'm your host at Unbossed. Unbossed is a podcast I've created to highlight women with amazing paths of success here in Chicago. Last year, I set out to interview the only 40 female CTOs in the city, and this year I've expanded to female CEOs and women in politics and government in Chicago. I'm excited to share these interviews with you, and I hope you contact me at www.unbossed.io or email me at marina@unbossed.io. Hope to see you soon. Jackie Kaplan-Perkins, a lifelong Chicagoan and daughter of immigrants, grew up in the city north side in the 1980s, where she spent her time rooting for the Cubs, listening to Styx, reading her father's Cuban newspapers, and pitching pennies in the basement of Congregation Ezra Israel. Over the past 3 decades, Jackie has been recognized as one of the city's dynamic leader and consummate connector whose life work has focused on equity, diversity, and advocating for the disenfranchised and underserved. An inventive thought partner and strategist, Jackie is a part of a broad network of leaders in the political, civic, and philanthropic communities that work together to create lasting system change. Jackie's superpower is a storyteller, and she uses her unique voice to raise awareness and resources for the causes and communities she champions. Welcome, Jackie. Hey, everybody, this is Marina, your podcast host at Unbossed. Today with me, I have a very special guest. Her name is Jackie Kaplan-Perkins. She is the senior advisor for the Movement Voter Project and chair at the Mayor's Advisory Council on Women with the City of Chicago. Welcome, Jackie.
Thank you. I'm very excited to be here.
Very excited. I know I'm going to get this out of the way. And I know last time we had some technical difficulties, and it's very difficult doing this interview via technology and Zoom. And, it's been what it is. But I am super excited to tell you a story. So we're going to dive right in. Jackie, tell us a little bit about you. Who are you? How did you grow up in Chicago? I know you have a very rich history of Chicago. Tell me that story.
Well, thank you. And I'm thrilled to be here. So my connection to Chicago, I am born and bred on the north side of Chicago, Rogers Park. And, I start my LinkedIn profile now. I start my story by saying I'm the daughter of immigrants.
Yes.
Both my parents came to this country in hopes for a better life from where they had been. They were both adults when they came. And my father was not a native English speaker. He was 30 years old. And they came here and settled eventually on the north side in Rogers Park, raised my sister and I there. And that time there and my parents and my growing up certainly defined me like it defines everybody. I was a first-gen kid who went to Rogers Grammar School and Mather High School on the north side, and then went to the University of Wisconsin and came out like most people, and came out of college with no idea what I was going to do with that liberal arts degree. I did radio, television, film. I watched a lot of TV my senior year, wrote stories on it. So I came out and quite literally fell into a job with the Chicago Foundation for Women. I had, I was volunteering at a place called the Peace Museum and met the then executive director, the first full-time executive director of CFW, a woman named Marianne Philbin. And she encouraged me to apply for a job. And I applied for that job on the same day that I applied for a job at Blockbuster Video, true story. And my joke is always, had CFW not called back first, I might still be selling Betamax versions of like Dirty Dancing out of my Pinto. But instead, things worked out really well. Marianne hired me initially to work with CFW for 6 weeks. And like many people, that job actually turned into something that I was at for 6 years. And that community, the people I met, the women in particular, the causes and what I was doing turned into my life's work. And so that started me off on my journey professionally. From there, I went on to be the finance director for Jan Schakowsky when she was running for Congress. Also, sort of on a whim, Jan called me up and said she was going to run against a machine politician and one of the wealthiest men in the world. And did I want to do it? And I quit the job I loved for 6 years. I quit my job at CFW that I adored this on the spot, because Jan's passion and commitment to social justice was sort of unlike anything I'd seen, and I believed in her. And I tell that story because that's sort of how my whole journey has been. I I am a walking embodiment of the expression "man plans and God laughs." You know, every time I've tried to make a really serious plan, it's gone off a different way, and it's gone to a whole different level quite often. Um, and just after I was working with Jan, around the time I was working with Jan, actually, I met my wife 20, oh my Lord, almost 25 years ago. And we knew we were interested in being parents. And I ended up basically going into doing consulting that I thought would be for a short period of time. But I got really involved in also the political world through Jan. I had been involved in many things. And when you're a lesbian who's willing to fundraise for a living, I was getting called by everybody to be on different political action committees and things like that. And then a lot of my friends were running for office. I had been involved with Public Allies early on, that was run by Michelle Obama. Then her husband, who many people know, was running for state Senate, then Senate, and I co-chaired his LGBT committee when he in those experiences, and was active as I could be in his presidential. And just these sorts of things started happening on the local and national levels. And I then was the Midwest director for Human Rights Watch for 4 years. And while I was at there during my time at Human Rights Watch, I turned 50. I lost my father, Poppy, and became parentless because my mother had died previous to him. Our beloved dog died. Our son was preparing to go to college. And I had really what I would say was like a midlife crisis. But instead of thinking about getting a new sports car, I started thinking about, did I want to do something different with my life? But because I realized at that point that, and I say this to people who will understand it, of when you become parentless, when you become the oldest of a family structure, right? Like all of a sudden the family tree, you know, I'm on the top rung of generations. You start to think a lot about your legacy, or at least I did. And I started to look back and see the work I had done, and realized I don't think I had moved the needle nearly as much as I had thought I would. And we can talk about that journey and those realities. Um, but one of the things I realized that I really wanted to do was, uh, I didn't know that I'm going to work for another 30, 40, 50 years. So I feel like the time is now and the urgency is now. And as I said to somebody, I really want to blow this shit up, is really what I want to do. I want to see how I could be part of doing something differently.
That's awesome. And let me just stop you for a second, because you gave me a lot of good stuff here, and I want to like let the audience know also, because like I love when the first time you told me about Papi and the history with your father there. I also, my father also passed away when I was 18, actually, so fairly young, and I loved my dad dearly. And tell us the story about you growing up, I think, with a father who was like 100% Cuban, right? And being in Chicago, and being a woman with a Latino father, that is trying to get her way in the world.
You know, I tell a story about Poppy that I could tell a lot of stories about Poppy, but you know, some of them are inappropriate because Poppy was certainly Poppy loved the ladies. He loved inappropriate jokes in many languages. And it's really an honor to be taping this today. Actually, I'm thinking so much about him because tomorrow is the anniversary of his passing, and I'm just feeling
Wow.
everywhere in the house and in my heart. So Poppy was a Cuban. He was a Cuban Jew. His family, like many families, left Poland and Russia and Ukraine and different countries over the history, and ended up in many countries all over, and many of them, there were a number of them that landed in Cuba and and settled for a few generations. And Poppy he 100% identified as Cuban through and through. As a matter of fact, his AOL tag was "I Cubano," so he. Um, but Poppy, unlike a lot of his friends who ended up settling in Florida, who were not Jewish, Poppy really, in many ways, believed in the revolution. So he was not one of like his friends who all became Republicans. He believed in this idea of socialism, right? In the best sense of the words. Now, I don't think in the Bernie Sanders sense, and not what happened under the Castro regime, but he had quite a thriving life. He was 30 years old when he came here, so he had quite a life in Cuba. But his entire family was leaving, and it's what you did, and so he came to Chicago and met my mom. So I'm completely thrilled that he made that decision. But he always felt very connected to Cuba. We never read books. We always just got told stories about his time in Cuba and his pet rooster, Picaro.
And
So
you had a chance to have this amazing trip with your wife, right? Like to
yeah, we
revisit.
went to this amazing trip and got to see where Poppy lived after he died with our very good friends.
Yeah.
Um, but anyhow, Poppy would take me to the local newsstand and in Evanston, and it was on Main and Chicago. And we would go and he would buy copies of Grama newspaper, which was, yeah, and at that point they were kind of a couple weeks old, but he would go and they didn't have them in stock all the time. But when they did, he would get them, um, and we would look at them together. I have this memory of some of them being him getting a Spanish one in Spanish and him getting me a copy in English. But in retrospect, I don't think they ever had an English version of it. Copy just sort of translated to me, and it was complete propaganda, right? Like it was complete, but as a 7-year-old or an 8-year-old who completely admires their father, right? And listen to these great stories, I believed, and so that was really some of my early belief in what a government could do for you.
That's
So
awesome. So, like I am a Latino woman and I've grown up in the Dominican Republic. And there's something interesting here where and my father always taught me to be like a very strong woman and independent and on my feet, right? But at the same time, the way women are treated in the Latin American countries are not necessarily the most feminist ways. In addition to that, I want to say there's another thing is like the fact that your father seemed like very much on the socialist side versus the Republican side, and what a lot of people don't realize is that Latinas are usually tendentially more Republican because of their conservative views and other religious views that most align with the Republican Party. Tell me a little bit about that and perhaps how like this economy definitely affected me and how I live my life now. Has it affected you and the way you live your life?
oh yeah, I mean, my early memories with my parents, and my mother's story is equally amazing, right? She was born in Poland, escaped with an Orthodox Jewish family to England, was immediately or sent away to a family because it was quite at the height of World War II and the Holocaust, and was sent away to live with a family, a not Jewish family in Scotland. Um, the stories, unraveled over the course of my entire life, so much so that we are not sure my mother actually knew her real birthday because we found documentation afterwards, one of those sorts
Yeah.
of stories And if she did, then she kept it, her entire life. Some of the ways that they got out of places. And so voting was incredibly important. Like, I always knew about voting. I can remember my parents had, we lived in this townhouse, and my parents' bedroom was very tiny. And if you sat at the edge of their bed, I think there might have been 2 feet at most until their dresser, and on their dresser was like a big honking television, right? My father sold television and appliances when I was growing up. He was a salesman, and then he eventually owned his own small store. And so we always had these ridiculous TVs. And so we had this TV, and my parents would often sit in bed and watch, television. As an aside, my favorite thing was that my mom did not speak Spanish, but they would watch, Mexican novellas, right?
Telenovelas, yeah.
And Poppy, like, they would just be engrossed in it. And, it's a great way to learn the language, right? Because you can totally tell what's going on. Every once in a while, he would have to say, that's her mother's brother's sister's husband disguised as, the guy who came back from the dead. And she'd be like, okay. And then they go back. Anyhow, but one of my earliest memories is sitting with my parents, and they're sitting in their usual place in the bed behind, their backs against their headboard. And I'm sitting at the end of the bed watching Jimmy Carter get elected, right? Like, we would watch the results together. And then for years after that, I would always want to be with them on election night. And calling Poppy on election night was always, one of my favorite things to do, as I got older and then got very active and was always working in election.
So what did you learn from your father, and then what did you learn from your mother, as it reflects your career path, and what do you do now, I guess?
I think that from my father, I learned how to talk to people, because ultimately I used to think that my superhero power was that I was a great fundraiser, because I raised a lot of money, right? I think people would often identify me if someone said, oh, what does Jackie Kaplan-Perkins do? They'd be like, she's a great fundraiser. She's a fundraiser. But what I really realized was really what I do is I'm a relationship builder, and I'm a connector.
Wow.
Right. And so in the end, there is fundraising, and then there is development. You'll often hear in nonprofits call it development, and political people call it fundraising. And fundraising really is what you think about. It's just get in, get out, get the money. I call fundraising is the equivalent of booty call. You get in, you get out, you get what you can get, right? But development is what it sounds like, long-term relationship development. And the way you do that is you listen to people, you hear what they say, and then you connect to what they need, and what they hope. And one of the things I think Poppy never articulated, but as a salesman, and I learned in development, is that people are buying an image of themselves, no matter what they do. So Poppy might say, you want this TV, right? This is before, big, you're going to want this 30, 50 inch, Magnavox, because I'm dating myself, right? But these big TVs that he would sell, because you want to be the type of guy who has that in, has his friends over and they're impressed with their TV, right? It's how you see yourself. I'm telling people, you want to be someone who's seen as wanting to change the world, right? And so but it's the same idea, right? You listen to people, you try and connect them to that. With my mom, I really think it's a very simple, my mom kept me grounded about family. And, the family that I come from, and the family that I created with Anne and David, our son, and our animals, and the grounding we have here is really,
Beautiful.
honestly, that's my true legacy.
Yes.
If I did nothing else, my legacy in that way is set.
Amazing.
That is so beautiful. You grew up professionally in a world in which you have been identify obviously as a woman, as lesbian, and you've talked before about your physical differences in as a thing of an image, right? And you talked about your image before. Do you want to share a little bit about that, and what were the pros and cons of being different, perhaps from others in your profession?
Yeah, that's a great question, and one that uh, I've learned a lot about. I I think one of the things that has made me, authentic, I would hope, is that with a craniofacial abnormality, you walk in and you're different, right? I've walked in, those are other stories over that whiskey we've talked about.
Yes, let's
Talked
do
about. Um, but those are other stories for a different time of the things people have said or assumed. Um, but I think at a very young age, not even intentionally, when you look different, and I think of friends who are people of color who grew up in particularly white communities.
it.
But obviously they can't walk in and fool anybody about looking different. I know that people look at me, um and it happens every day, right? Every day when I meet somebody, I can tell that moment when they're trying to figure out which eye to follow, or have a moment about my face. The masks have been interesting. They've been total equalizers in some ways, right?
Amazing, yeah. I,
So anyhow, but I think early on, like many people who've experienced being different in some ways, I learned to be funny. I learned to tell stories. I learned to try and figure out how to put people at ease. Um, Interestingly enough, now I'm ready to make people really uncomfortable, right?
I
I
love
want to make people uncomfortable, and I'm always, willing to push the limit on that a little bit as well.
that.
So I did that. I wasn't out till a little bit later, and it's interesting because I worked at the Chicago Foundation for Women at a time when I was dealing with my own coming out, when the feminist movement was dealing with its own rectifying of, like, the feminist movement early on did not, there were lots of issues with not a lot of lesbians, not a lot of people of color, because people didn't want it to seem too radical to get the ideas passed.
Mm.
And I tell this story quite humbly of, um, so meeting Jan Schakowsky, and if you ever really want to have a coming out tour, work with Jan Schakowsky in the 90s, right? When she was one of only 5 people to vote against the Defense of Marriage Act, talking about in Illinois, she was a state rep at the time, talking about how you'd be on the wrong side of history. And for the record, all those people, some of who are still around, voted against my family only 25 years ago. So um in any case, but one day I was with Jan, and we were going somewhere in a car, and we were talking about the trans community. And now this is, I've been out for a couple of years. I'm feeling like the lesbian belle of the ball. I'm always with her at these events. People are, it's awesome. And I am saying to her, I don't know that we should try and, have the T in LGBT, right? I'm in my 20s. I'm
Yeah.
saying what I think because they seem too radical comparatively, right? This is my big source of shame. So I out myself on this all the time. And Jan basically, I like to say, um, beat the emotional hell out of me. No, she really, she schooled me. And really, we had this conversation, and she said, she came back to the feminist movement and how the feminist movement was to lesbians and people of color, and talked about how the LGBT community could do it differently. And I would say that day I became, proudly a trans activist, as well as that I embrace the whole alphabet in the activism that I took on, but it took me someone else to show me. So yeah, I think it is. I don't know how not to bring my whole self to everything I do. And the only one time I didn't, the one time in 30 years that I was now realizing that I was inauthentic to myself,
Yeah.
and tried to play a role because that was what, for lots of reasons that I own my own. That was the only time professionally, things didn't go as well for me. And so I gotta be all me. So
That's amazing. No, that's really good. And I'm sure you face quite a few challenges, but I really love to highlight the fact that you call yourself also a storyteller, right? Do you have a short story? I'm going to put you in the spot. I don't know. Do you have a good short story that you like to tell that it just zings?
I think the short story that most people have heard me tell was about getting drunk with Maya Angelou. Actually, there she is, right here. We are both
What? I
we are
don't know
both
this story.
right there. This moment, and then the other picture next to it is me in my first Pride Parade with Jan. Actually,
Oh, let's hear it, if you don't mind.
so it was, I was working at the Chicago Foundation for Women. We were trying to make our event, I was hired to do a large luncheon, and we were turning it from sort of, the local women's event to try and get us on a national spotlight, not national, but trying to get it bigger, raise more money. And we decided we wanted somebody who had a name. And we talked about Maya Angelou, and at that point, and so we booked her, but we had to book her a year in advance,
Well,
which is what we tried to do. And in between the year we booked her, she read the On the Pulse of the Morning speech, poem at the Clinton inauguration. So she was already quite a well-known author. And she, at that time, then just went off the charts. And so we went from an event that did like 800 people to like selling out at 2,500. And, we had huge waiting lists. And I thought, I'm a wunderkind, right? Like I know, and this is it, I'm 26 years old, 27 years old, and I've pulled this off. And the day of the event, I went to go pick her up in her hotel room, which is what I always did to sort of brief the talent. And then I was to take her where she needed to go everywhere. And when I went, I, knocked on the door, and there was no answer. And I knocked again, and there was no answer. And then I started getting like frenetic, thinking, the poet laureate of the United States is dead on the other side of the door. And on top of it, I have 2,500 people in a ballroom, And so, it's before cell phones. I run to the lobby. And as I run in the lobby, it's all coming undone, right? All these camera crews are coming in, and people are saying, where's the event that Oprah is coming to? And this is, and I'm like, Oprah? They're like, well, she's best friends with Maya Angelou. And I'm flipping out because I can't find Maya Angelou. And we had like the governor showed up. It was and I am now have completely lost control. And I turn around, and my boss, who is my good friend, the woman who hired me, but not so happy at that moment, I turn around and I said, I see her standing there like, what the hell has happened? And I said, I can't find Maya Angelou. And she said, you're going to want to fucking find her. And I said, I'm on it, right? And I didn't know where to start. And out of nowhere, I hear a whole bunch of hubbubaloo. And Dr. Angelou is coming in through like a side door by herself, right? And she's not supposed to be by herself. It's part of the contract. She had gone to get her hair done, right? Which and told exactly no one, right? Or at least not me, being the. And I run and get her, and they're literally going into the ballroom, and I go to get her, and right as we're at the edge of the ballroom, she turns to me and says, I'm not ready to go in there. I want to go have a drink with you. And so when Maya Angelou asks you to go have a drink, you go and you turn around. And I said to one of my colleagues, start everything on time. I'll have her back in time. And then it was crazy. We sat down and she ordered us whiskeys and um and uh and I'm sitting with Dr. Angelou, and she is telling stories, and she's talking about her nephew Buddy, and she's reciting poetry off the cuff. And I am having, at first I'm freaking out because I'm thinking I'm going to lose my job. And then I have this absolute moment of clarity. And that is, I am sitting here with Maya Angelou, and she is like reading poetry, reciting poetry to me. And it was this amazing, amazing feeling. And when you haven't eaten anything and you have a little bit, and you do get a little loopy. And so our time went on, and I got her in just in time to give her speech, and she wowed everybody. But that was one of my absolutely favorite stories.
Something you have not told that Maya Angelou may or may not have said. I'm gonna leave it up to you off the record during this drinking story. Something maybe that you still remember, that she, beyond the fact that I also would be absolutely starstruck. Anything that she said that resonated with you? And it's
Yeah, I mean, it was the telling of the story about her nephew Buddy. It was just the simple details, right? Like about him being in a field, the way she described it. It was just one of those moments that you're just like someone who notices everything around her. I think what was the most telling to me about that moment, in addition to what she said, was what she experienced. So we ended up being in the corner of this like hotel lobby restaurant just by ourselves, right? Because everybody was in the ballroom, sitting and talking. And so the only people around were the wait staff. And soon after, full disclosure, I think we had 2 drinks there. And after the first drink, when we ordered the second round, and I would like to say that Dr. Angelou did initiate that. I wouldn't have done that, but I am willing to go with it. The wait staff started to realize who she was, right? She's actually quite a large woman, tall as well. And people, and her voice is, and they started to come up to her and like get water. And while they're giving her water, say, my mama got off drugs because of you. I didn't commit suicide because of you. I mean, people just, and you realized what incredible power telling your story and sharing and having this presence of mind, and how she had to build a bit of a fortress around her. Why it made sense. At first, I have to say, what I learned from that experience, at first I was like, are you kidding me? You're not going to go into that ballroom. We've paid you. You're supposed to be sitting with donors, la, 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 the whole thing. And what I realized is people wanted so much of her.
Yeah.
And she was very specific about how much they got. And that is a lesson for women, I think, in particular. So I said that I brought my whole self, meaning I bring my whole personality, and and I'm unapologetic for who I am, because who I am is always learning. So I'm not saying, oh, take it or leave it. I'm saying, but I'm going to be honest about who I am and what I'm thinking. But I also learned you can bring your whole self. You don't have to give it all the time. Right? It is work. And especially in the nonprofit world, I have seen it's almost like burnout is used as
badge of honor.
Badge of honor, as source of pride, a badge of honor. And you know what? It's not good. It's not good for you. It's not good for anybody, right? And one of the things I've been really admiring, and we could talk about this later, has been some of the incredible healing justice work a lot of communities of color are doing, that I've learned about through my work with Movement Voter Project. Because we must take time
Absolutely.
to take
Yeah, we have a similar culture, used to be, I don't know, I mean, it still is, I feel like, but in tech, where the more you work, the more you overwork, the more hours you put in, and the more you sacrifice, the more you're going to become the next unicorn, the next, Bill Gates or Mark Zuckerberg or whomever, like that is. And really, like, I stop and ask myself, like, why is this a thing, right? Like, why do you choose to spend more hours in front of your computer isolated instead of 1 more hour with your family having dinner and connecting with them? And so I can relate to the nonprofit world in that way, where I can see people working for really good causes, but to the point where they can no longer it's unsustainable for the long term.
Absolutely. And we see it in politics too.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, cool. I think this is a good wrap for this specific one. I want to jump into your legacy, because you mentioned your legacy. You mentioned the work that you want to leave for the future. And if we were to imagine, like, it's 30 years from now, or imagine 50 years, however many years you want to imagine, it's 50 years from now, and this is what you have left behind. This is the legacy. What is the story, and what does it look like to you?
It's interesting to talk about 50 years from now, right? Because 30 years from now, I can see myself being here. In 50 years, I being 103 seems like a different legacy. And
Yeah,
so
that's like when you're gone, right? Why?
What is my legacy? I mean, I think I hope that my legacy is, as I said, that, the big picture things, right? Of that, my family and, and who David is, I am seeing the values our son brings into the world and realizing, like, he's going to be okay. The world is going to be okay because he and our nieces are amazing, and, just going to give, what they want to do and how they want to be in the world. And so that's a huge part of the legacy. And I realize that I've been part of that, right? And my niece has just called me to tell me that she got an internship today in doing political fundraising. You can't say that my heart isn't growing a little bit big. Want to talk to me about this. And so my legacy might also be my dog that's barking. But when I think about my professional legacy, I want to be that I connected people. And that's the piece that I'm talking about, this connecting people, and bringing people and raising up voices and bringing people to the table, and who never envisioned themselves or weren't supposed to be there. So, I mean, I think the piece I was talking to you that you were referring to is, it took me until very recently. So I've mentioned I didn't get, that the mayor. So when I had my moment of midlife crisis and left Human Rights Watch and wasn't, was figuring out what I was going to do, Lori Lightfoot, who happened to be, because there are 5 lesbians in Chicago, was someone who was at our wedding, 20 some years ago. I'd been on her finance committee. I thought, I just need a few months, roll up my sleeves, reconnoiter. Everybody was talking to me about fundraising jobs, and I was realizing that I didn't think that that's what I wanted to do anymore. And so then Lori wins, a Black lesbian who happens to be a friend, right? Wins and is mayor of the city of Chicago. And all of a sudden, I have this crazy access, right? And a friend of mine said to me, I said, it's amazing. She said, what's it like? And I said, well, it's great to have a friend at the table. And she said, when are you going to realize you've been at the table? And I think, again, that thing of being different is that I think we always see ourselves as a little bit of an outsider.
Yes.
What I realized is that I had so much power, and I kept thinking, I'm not supposed to be here, right? This kid from the North Side with first gen and craniofacial abnormality and a lesbian, and I don't have as much money as so many of these people that I'm working with, and blah, blah. But I'm like, you know what I have? I have a network of unbelievably authentic relationships, right? Not the bullshit kind, but for most of them were the really authentic ones, at least the ones that have stuck around. And I could connect those people to people who are like me, who could have never envisioned themselves being in the same room as them, just like the women at the Chicago Foundation for Women or Jan did for me, right? And so to me, that's that legacy. And for me now, my legacy isn't going to be about my kid and his friends getting all these privileged connections because of us, because all, we've been very fortunate, and he has and they have. But I want to make sure that it is folks like people going through IC Stars program, where I know, like uh, uh, kids of color, queer kids, and kids, now I'm even talking about young adults, what voices aren't at the table? Because yes, there may be a Black lesbian who's in charge of Chicago, and that means a lot, right? But at the other tables in the city, or, we're working in diversifying those, look at nonprofits. So many of them still run by white people who are giving away money in communities that they've never been a part of. Doesn't mean that they're not great people but we need more voices at the table. And I think I can do that. And that's my legacy.
I
Right.
love that. I really love that, especially for Chicago, which is interestingly known as a Black city, and yet it feels sometimes so non-Black. What is step one of that legacy? What are you doing right now that we can talk about, or we can get people involved, or we can, highlight even for you? What is step one? What are you doing right now?
One of the most exciting things I've gotten to do, as far as an organization goes, that I don't think I've been this excited since I was at the Chicago Foundation for Women, has been getting to work with Movement Voter Project. In a nutshell, MVP, Movement Voter Project, moves money. We were focused for a while about moving money into communities of color in key swing states, to communities and not candidates, right? So to community organizations that were organizing in their community. And of course, we're also organizing around a lot of issues, including electoral issues, right? So they were organizations in the Black community in Milwaukee. They were organizations in Native communities. They were organization in Hmong communities. They were organization young queer communities that were organizing their communities to make sure the communities had what they needed, and that were advocating for issues that were important to those communities, be it the anti-trans, against the anti-trans legislation we're seeing, Fight for 15, which, fighting for living wages, criminal justice reform, et cetera, right? And people were willing to invest in that fairly heavily. Mostly white folks were willing to invest in these communities of color because they, I think for a large amount of people, their initial reason they did it is they wanted Trump out of office. And they thought if they could give money to these communities, help them get out the vote, they would vote against Trump. And we saw for places like Georgia, all the, the states, and it worked. But now I'm really working on getting folks to continue to invest in these communities, because it isn't just about getting the one voter, one and done, right? We want to have a progressive decade. We want to make sure that at the end of this decade, there are more leaders of color at the table in electoral politics. There are more making policy. There are, and it starts with investing in these communities who know best what they need. So MVP, go to movement.org. So that's a lie. Movement.vote. I don't even know where I got that. Movement.vote. And and just see a little bit about what we're doing and the type of work the organizations that we support, because we really move the money to those organizations, but those organizations are on the ground. So it's a great resource. So that's one of the ways I think people, we can really get involved. And I am a huge believer in mentorship.
Yes.
And I think if you have connections, I mean, bottom line is be a resource sharer, not a resource hoarder. One of the things, just totally, and it hasn't been perfect, but for every one of my people who calls me and says, will you talk to my kid or this kid or that kid or find out, or what do you know about this job? I say to them or the young adult, great, now I will talk to you. Can you also give me the name or have someone call me that is maybe first gen kid, person of color, maybe doesn't have parents who have connections, because I would like to talk to them too. There's lots of formal networks to be mentors too, but really, make some long-term commitments to that. And if you're in a position of power, I mean, really, please don't ever say, we tried to look for diverse people to fill these positions, but couldn't find anyone. There are pipelines and pipelines out there.
Absolutely.
Do some self-reflection on, is it something about your organization where is it who you're using for your search? Is it who's searching? Look, my network looks a lot, not exactly like me, but right, we tend to run with the people we know. I know lots of people in the nonprofit. I know lots of,
Yes.
so you're going to need to expand your circles and have some difficult conversations around that. There is, yeah, and I think really
That's
being
lovely.
learning.
That's lovely. Thank you so much. Okay. So you have a couple more minutes for us.
You bet.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Let's unfortunately it's almost time, believe it or not. It like flies so fast. I wanted to touch on a few more points. Let's talk about the Mayor's Advisory Council on Women. What's the work there that has been done? I really am a feminist in the modern sense of the word, and I really want to make sure that we touch on that and highlight the work that you guys are doing over on that side.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of my favorite things I learned when I was at the Chicago Foundation for Women, and that we used to say there, and I often say as part of the advisory, is that for every issue that we come across, for every issue on the national agenda, on the local agenda, and a community agenda, there is a component of it that is specific to women, right?
Absolutely.
And
Always.
it is, right. And so we need to talk about what parts we're not talking about. And I think one of the things the women's advice, the women's,
The council.
the council, the Women's Advisory Council for the Mayor. Let's stop. You can edit and say, the Women's Advisory Council for the Mayor, one of the things we've been looking at a lot in talking about are 3 specific issue areas, because we can talk about everything. And even within these, there's a lot to talk about, but they are economic security, safety, and and health. And so you can talk about any of those in so many areas. But what we're trying to talk about specifically with the Mayor's Advisory is to put together a scorecard, so that we are making sure that every time we're talking about any sort of issue, we are also thinking about how this may access women. So for instance, the economic security piece. Well, I think we know that this pandemic, right, has been, what are they calling, a women's session, right? Like the recession has really hit women the most. And we know, for instance, that the mayor in particular, even before this, was really looking at investing Southwest. We are also now trying to talk about, what does that specifically look like for women on the Southwest side about, about their economic recovery. How do we really look at women businesses, et cetera, and how can we be an advocate for that? When we talk about something like gender-based violence, for instance, we had a briefing, the advisory did with the Chicago Council on Human Relations, and they were saying that even though we know anti-Asian hate crimes have been going up, especially with women, Asian women, they have not seen an uptick in reporting at all. As a matter of fact, they have seen almost, I believe it was no reports. And the reason we believe this, one of the reasons maybe, is that people, in order to get into that process for them to investigate it, it has to come through the police. Well, we know that there are cultural and gender issues around people going to the police.
Immigration, even, yes, absolutely, all of it.
Status, you keep this stuff at home, it's families deal with it, blah, blah, blah. So how can we look at a place that women can be safer and still get these reporting, reports out? And so these are the types of things we are talking about, looking at, and thinking that we can have an impact on with the Mayor's Advisory Council on Women. So we're really, I'm excited. We've really, we've yet to meet in person. We're hoping to be able to do so in some degree in the next few months. But we had some fits and starts with the pandemic about being able to even, organize this, but Zoom is amazing. And, breakout groups and all of that have given us some opportunities to do some of this work. And we're hoping we can have some impact on how the city is looking at issues, all these issues that we're addressing and how they specifically impact women.
Yeah, thank you so much for that work. I am a huge fan, and I appreciate, all your effort and the mayor's effort to look into this issue. The next issue we talked about a little bit is the fact that this year is the centennial anniversary for the
Tulsa
massacre. And you're doing some work around that as well, or you some thinking around that. What's your involvement?
Well, this is another one of those times where, again, I feel like I've learned more in the last few years than I had learned in a long time around, racial justice and equity issues, like many people, and getting to work on this. I was one of the people, like many, and I've been engaged in this world for a long time, who only in the last few years learned about what happened in Tulsa. And I've had the good fortune, I'm doing a small consulting project with Tulsa Rebuilds, which is around the centennial, looking at Tulsa, how we make Tulsa truly the tech hub for
Cool.
Black and brown tech entrepreneurs, and really to invest, hundreds of millions, if not hopefully billions of dollars into making Tulsa, what Silicon Valley was really for Black and brown communities. So I'm just starting to work with some groups and doing some coaching around some of the people who want to make some connections. It's all connection based to people I know who might be interested in this. But I'm so honored to get to be even a very small part of this. It's really exciting work, and maybe that gets to be another little part of my legacy. So
I love that. That is so amazing. And then, last and not least, I would definitely love to end us on a high note, and, talk whiskey, talk vaccination, and talk like future and COVID, and see how this goes, right? We both said, well, I guess I'll talk for myself, speak for myself. I got recently vaccinated. I felt really sick for a couple of days, but I'm over the hump of that, looking forward to the future and reconnecting with people in person. How are you doing with that?
Yeah, we both, my wife and I got vaccinated. We got our second shot almost 2 weeks ago. Friday will be 2 weeks. And Yeah, it feels really,
Groovy.
what are we gonna do? It's the small things, right? Go out to a restaurant, get on a plane and see some people. So we're excited about that. And whiskey season is slowly going to be behind us as we switch to lighter drinks for the summer. But I do promise we will sit down and have some. But I'm looking forward to having we've had some cocktails in our yard, but I'm looking forward to getting to some of those wonderful balconies or porches. Do you have a favorite place you like to? I'm trying to think where I want to go have a.
I like anything outside and with some beats. So like as long as there's beats and there's drinks and it's outside, I'm in. Game.
I'm looking forward to seeing if there's like any of the concerts, right? Like I know Lollapalooza is not coming this year, but like Millennium Park, I feel like
Yeah.
Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me and Millennium is always one of my favorites. So maybe they're going to get to do that. Yeah, I'm feeling, I think I told you, and maybe last time we talked about this, that I had been volunteering at a vaccine clinic. And got to see some of the same people come in, a few weeks later for their second vaccine. And to see hope on
Yeah.
people's faces, knowing is just, what started as fear the few weeks before when they came in and turning to hope, myself included, was like fantastic. So
That's amazing. Well, thank you so much for coming on, Jackie. It's been a double pleasure, obviously. And I look forward more conversation with you and catching up with you in a few months and see where you're at.
I'm thrilled. Thank you so much for doing this.